Hi everyone. So it has been a while since my last video. So if you notice my background actually moved to a new place, so it's kind of why there's less video. Yeah, but for today I'm going to show you examples of how to create a great dashboard that is actually linked to Notion. So I actually have been developing quite a few dashboards for my clients, and I've just learned a lot of tricks and tips on how we can work more seamlessly with Notion and Grid, because there are some quirks that you only have to deal with when it comes to Notion. For example, maybe the date format is a bit tricky because Grid can't really read it properly. And then another one is like how can you embed the grid charts in a more proper way. So yeah, I'm going to teach you how you can do this in grid. So for example, here you can see I just create a very simple actual and then projected cells. So you can just switch between years and kind of do this. So it's actually quite simple to do this once you get the data correctly. But it's just that sometimes it could be like a bit more frustrating for newer users since there's some quirks that's actually not that well documented. So yeah, let's go to grid now. So if you're new to Grid, so just to give a summary, is just that Grid is actually a additional extra tools that allows you to connect your data into Notion directly. So anything that updates, so as far as my understanding is correct, so it should take around like 5 to 10 seconds anytime you update from Notion, and then actually reflects this chart here. So earlier I actually have a Notion database that's actually linked to here. So which in this case will be here at the bottom here. So let me just zoom in here just so you guys can see it. Um, So yeah, hope you can see it. So this is the actual node. So you can see from here, this is actually a Notion database that's connected to Grid. And then what we have here is actually the chart. So what we're gonna do right now is to create a data model. So basically the format that actually works with the chart itself. So I'm gonna show you the end result. So so when it comes to Grid, it actually works under something called Grid Sheet. This is actually just a Google Sheet. So if you know a little bit about formulas and how things works, so it'll be easier. But if you don't know, don't worry. I'll just provide the this template here so you can kind of duplicate and just learn it along. So yeah, so for grid sheet here, so basically what we have is we have sales reference, main, variable, and then line chart. So basically I'll kind of go through what each means. So but the end result is that we want to get this tab here, line chart, so that we can actually directly reference the table here. So it's actually very simple. Like once we have this data, we can kind of just set it up. So I'm going to show you later. But for now, I'm going to show like explain a little bit of why we need each of these. So this is probably like kind of a standard way of how I usually develop, just to create a more structure and then just easier maintenance. So first of all, we have sales reference. So you'll be kind of curious like what is this, and then why do we need this, right? So you can see like we have the invoice, the actual projected date, and then so this is kind of the month, and then we have the month number, and then the year. So why do we need this? And then we actually have this cells here. This is actually just from database, right? So the first reason why we need to have a cells, so I call it reference. So basically, it's to reference whatever we have in the Notion database. So the one main problems when you first come to like using Notion is that every time I think when you create a new property in Notion or you delete it. So let me just show you an example, right? So now we have it in order name, actual, date, projected. So I'm going to show you an example now. So this is the database that we have. So I'm going to create a new table here, a property here. So maybe I just call status property. So that's done. So let's just go to read. So refresh. So just sync it. I'm not sure if I remember this. Okay, now you can see it's still in the same row. But then, no, I think it's changes, right? Was it changed though? Name, actual date, projected status. Let me find another example. If I kind of move this around, let's see, does it change though? Okay, so it doesn't really change. So yeah, it kind of sometimes kind of random. So what you get is like you have name, actual date, projected status, right? And then if I go back to Notion, so you can see it's doesn't kind of line up with what I expected it to be. So this is one problem. And sometimes when you delete it, it kind of changes. So I don't quite get what's the logic behind it. So that's one of the reasons why, in order to kind of avoid these kind of issues, because what we're doing is we're going to use something called query, which is something I will show you later, is that we actually reference the exact column by itself. So let's say I want to get the date, right? So column C. So let's say like we kind of move, we create a new properties, we kind of delete the properties. What would happen is that we will still this property columns might be like become projected, but then we're still referencing column C, which is actually the wrong one. So that's actually the first reason why we need to use this formula here, it's called choose columns, because when you type the name on the top here, it will always reference the correct columns. So in this case, like even if you kind of change, you add on properties, like it wouldn't impact anything because you will always be in the same format. And then the next one is that you can see the actual and projected, because I kind of want it to be like in this format. It's just easier for me to manipulate the data. So you can see here like the actual and the projected is kind of separated. So there's like a no, it's just not arranged properly, I would say. So this is another reason why we do that. So yeah, that makes sense. So normally, so for this formula, it's actually quite simple. You can just copy this formula and kind of just drag it over, and then it will just automatically reference all the formulas we have here. Yeah. So, and then second thing, so what we need from here is we need the dates. So you can see in the middle here, we actually have January to December, right? So we kind of have to follow the dates so that we kind of know when it is. So in this case, let me just go back here. So we have date in the, how do you call this? The number, no, the text format. And then we have the date in the number format and then the year. So in this case, we don't really need the text format for our use case, but I'm just going to show you here. So this formula here is actually the same formula. We just added this just to make it sure that we can change it in the text format. So if you have used our Notion formula before, so it's something similar to like format dates. So this is kind of how the formula will be. So you kind of change it to a June, and then here you change it to the number, and then here you change a year. So why do we do this again? Because one of the main reasons is that if you're familiar with using query, so in this case in our line chart here, it's actually using this formula called query. So what query does is that actually you want to get the data in the raw material, right? In this case, like we want to get the data from here, and then kind of arrange, slice and dice to a format that we would like to have it. So in our case, like you can see from this line chart here, so I'll actually order it based on the month. So in this case, it will be a number format, and then we actually group it based on the actual numbers, actual amount, and the projected amount, and then we actually don't see anything else. So this is kind of how you need to prepare the data model for this to work in grid. But in order to get this, it's actually kind of tricky because when you use the query function, right, normally you actually reference the date directly. So in this case, if we go to the sales database here, right, so we actually have the date here. So by default, if the date property is the format is correct, so you can actually use query to kind of change the date to maybe like month, year. But in our case, because Notion, when they get the data into like a database, right? So this is something like I'm not sure why, but it's actually displayed as a, so this thing is actually displayed as a text format. And it's actually not a date format. So when you use the query function, right, it doesn't quite work because it doesn't know what it is. So in this case, in our case, we use choose columns, right? So here we change it to month, this month as well, this is year. So you can see this is actually just a format here. Like if I just remove this, right, just to make sure, you see an example here, just remove this. You can actually see this is actually changed back to the date. But then if you just change to year, can see this actually become year. So this would work here because, from my understanding, based on what the grid team tells me as well, is that this actually doesn't actually identify whether it's a text or date. You just kind of convert it to the year, and then just you can manipulate it using year in this case. So that's kind of the one another reason why we have this reference column here or reference sheet. So instead of using the database directly, we actually just reference it so that we can have like a more cleaner data structure that we can use instead of referencing the sales database. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. And this is why we can create this data model in the line chart here. So we have the date, we have the actual and the projected. And the next thing we have here, the second sheet is called main. So normally what I have main is more like how they call it, like a mapping file. So something that is static. Of course, not completely static in this case. So here we have like a month. So basically January to December, and then here we have the year. So what do you need this for? Right? So first of all, like for month, we don't need it in this case, but some of my use case like dashboard, you will be able to select month. For example, we can only select year. So in this case, you can see here, there's actually a drop down here. You can select 2022 or 2023. So in this case, this is actually for the drop down purposes. And then how do we get this right? Because how do we know like what we want to make this as dynamic as possible? For example, next year, like if someone add 2024 right, in Notion database. So in this case, let me just go to Notion. So let's say I add one more here. So let me just duplicate it just to make it easier. Duplicate this, and now change the year to 2023, 2024. So in this case, I want the drop down to be able to select 2024 as well. So in this case, let's go back to grid, and then I'll just kind of refresh the data. It's taking a bit while, probably because I'm kind of recording as well. And then, okay, so you should be able to see 2024 if everything works right. Yep, you can see this is actually automatically being updated. And then what would happen is that you can see here we have the drop down for 2024 as well. You can see the actual for Jan and February. That's kind of weird why they have both months, but okay. Yep, so there it is. You have it. Yeah, that's kind of how you want to make it dynamic. As to how we make this dynamic, is that I'm basically using query. So if you're quite a new to query function, it's basically like I mentioned earlier, kind of like referencing a data just to slice the data that you want, right? So in this case, it's actually quite simple. So when you type the query format, let me just start from beginning again so that you guys can kind of follow along. So if I just remove this thing, so first you type query, and then I kind of reference the self reference here. In this case, I only need one column. So I only need the year column here, column F. So, but I can kind of just show you guys. I select all the columns here. So normally I just go to until ZZ. It's actually the end of it. So in case I will add more columns, right? So it won't affect it. And then I want to select. So then you have to do this like what do you call this? Apostrophe. I think you should call it, but yeah. And then you have to have this syntax or select. So what this means is basically just select which column you want. So if you use like SQL, it would be very similar. So select, in this case, we should want to select. So we want to select F. So select F. If I just press enter for now, you can see it automatically populates all the years that is available here. But in this case, I don't want to have so many, right? If I have so many, you can see like it's actually just show everything, which I definitely do not want. So in this case, we want to kind of limit it so that it only shows the date that we want, or the year in this case. So first thing is we want to group by F. So what this means is, let me show you. So in this case, you can see it automatically just group by F. So what does it mean is that it doesn't repeat something that's already similar, the same one. So when it's grouped by F means that it only show the values that's not duplicates. So in this case, we have 22, 2022, 2023, 2024. So yeah, that's how you got it. This is the year that we have. And then similarly, you can come back here, you can see it's actually the same thing. Okay. And then the next one we have is variable. So what does variable is? It's basically things that will change value every time you select an input. So in this case, I have year here. So normally what I have like year, month. So that's like a more simple one. So what this is that when I select here, right, 2022 May, for example. So you can see this is being changed. So this thing, it has to reflect somewhere, right? You should know like there's actually changes. So what happens is here, you can see this is actually being changed to 2022. And then when you change back to 2021 or 2023, so you can see it's being reflected here. So this is kind of like just an output for your drop down button, so that every time you select something, you just reflect, and then the chart will just reflect the same thing here. It will just reference it. So another tricks that I always do for my Dropbox or like the selected value here is that I will just make sure that every time when the user log in, right, when they open the chart, so I assume they want to see the current year. So in this case, you can see I have this formula here. So now in a year, so if you use Notion before, you might not understand now. Basically, now is, let me just show you now. So if you type now, it just shows you just like the current time. So it's a weird format here, but basically it's just current date, current time. So if you just include like year in front, we just show you the current year. So the idea is that by default, when you come into here, you just select the current year. So if you leave it a blank, right, actually it won't show anything. So when the users come in, right, yeah, when the user come in, they actually have a blank option here, so they wouldn't be selected. But if you put a formula, you always go to 2023, which is just like a quality of life things that I always do for my clients. Yep, and then that's it. So this is the variable sheets, and then lastly we have the line chart. So the line chart sheet. So for my standard practice for each of the charts that I create, I always create a separate sheets just so that it's easier to maintain. And then like anything goes wrong, anything that I want to change or for documentation purposes, I'll always have like a separate sheets to let me know. So in this case here we have it right. So what I have is I need a data for the month, and we need a data for the actual and the projected. So it's actually very simple. But how we can get to this is basically I'm using query again. So you can see I'm referencing from A to ZZ. Basically it's the sales reference, which is something I did earlier. In this case, I want the column E, column B, and column C. So I kind of see what's EBC, right? You can go to sales reference. So E is the date. So basically it's the month in number format. And then B is the actual, and then C is the projected. So that's how we have it. So you can see from here we have EBC. But then if I just do it, let me just do another one just to show you. Query to here, just go to until ZZ, and EBC. Let's kind of see what happened. Nothing happened here because we forgot to put select. So just the correct syntax. So if we put EBC, right, what would happen is that it's actually just showed all the data without grouping it together. In this case, we actually have different months. We might have something like the same month, right? For example, here's a June, here's another June, and then otherwise we actually have different year. So we didn't actually show the year here, but you can actually show it. But in this case, like we kind of want to group it, right? So if it's in the same year, it has to be in the same year. If it's in the same month, it has to be the same month. So in this case, how can we do that though? So first thing is we want to make sure that the data is within the same month because we actually plan to group it by month, right? So January to December. So we want to make sure that anything that's being displayed is actually within the same year. So how you can do this actually, you can use this formula called syntax called where. So where something is what. So in this case, we want to reference to where. So which column we do want to reference? So we want to reference F. So where F equals to 2023. So this is the simplest one is, you can see when I type this right, it's actually referencing so that it's only showing data for 2023. But this is still not quite right because we still have like, you see like May is actually, we have two May here. So we kind of want to group it together so it doesn't like being separated, right? So what you can do is actually use another formula called group by. So what do we want to group by? So we want to group by E, not E. We want to group by, yeah, it is E. So you want to group by the month number, right? So we just group by E. So what happens here is you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 until 12. So you actually kind of help us to organize the row already. But something weird happened now. So you can see actual projected kind of disappeared. So yeah, query is actually not that smart. Like in terms of it doesn't kind of know exactly what you want. You have to give very clear instructions. In this case, why it's not showing right is because it's kind of confused. Like, oh, what happened though? Like, do we? Because it's actually separated, right? It doesn't kind of automatically sum it for you. So what you need to do is actually just need to combine the numbers together. So in this case, you can just use sum. So sum b. If I just type sum b, right, you can see the values actually appear here because it's just automatically just sum it together for each of the month now. Same thing, you have to do it for projected. So sum C. So you can see it's being projected now correctly. So that's the first one. And then probably not the first one, probably a lot of ones already, can't remember. But yeah, you can see this is kind of how the formula works. And then the last thing what we want to do is we want to make sure this is dynamic. So for now you can see like you can just remember like 1300, right? So what will happen if we just change this? So you can see, why is it still the same though? We choose again. Okay. Yeah, I can see if I choose 2024, right? You see everything just disappeared and then just changed to a new one. This is because we're actually referencing the year. So here is actually f equals 2023, right? It's actually a static one. So what's going on here is we're actually referencing the variable b2. So what is b2, right? So b2 is actually variable b2. So basically we're referencing the year. So every time it's like a new different year, we just update the number so that we have the data ready for it. So how do we do this? So I'll just do it here. So instead of equals, we write this formula here. It's very kind of specific, so you kind of have to memorize it. Basically, just two. This one I don't know what this one called. Like a dot thing at the top, and then another two double dot. The last thing you have to put n. So last thing, you just have to refer to the variable. In this case, we 2023, and then just press it, and then there you have it. It's actually referencing now. And then if I just do select the year again, you can see both of them are having actual equals number. So this is kind of how you can work. So let's just delete this as we have done our example here. So that's how you have the data model. The last thing is just to make sure you hook up to grid database, the grid chart. So first thing, I'll just show you how you can actually hook up the year. So this is also a bit different. So target cell is basically the cells that you want it. Every time you select the value, right, you want to change it. In this case, it's the variable. So I have to show you quite a few times. So this should be self-explanatory. The second one is a bit more tricky. Is in terms of option. Let me just show you. So for now, you can see our options only 2022, 2024. But then you can see earlier when I show you at the beginning. So if you go to main rate, you can see every time we add on a new year, so 2025, 2026, it actually automatically increments it, add on. But then if you do it like, let me just show you an example of why I'm emphasizing on this. So let's say like you can actually just do easier version, right? You can just select the options. Let me just show you. So this option, right, you can actually just select like this, for example. You can select all of them, right? Just make sure you cover your bases. So what will happen here is, let me just, so if you just cover the whole row, what happened here is you can actually see like a lot of blank rows. So it's actually not the best looking one. So what we want to do is, there's actually a formula you can use. So this is actually thanks to the grid team as well. This is kind of how they help me. So I don't quite understand how this works to be honest, but you probably just copy and paste what we have here and then kind of change the row columns. So basically using a mixture of filter and then is blank and not. And then once you have it, you can kind of see like it will not show anything that's not blank. It only shows anything that has a value here. So yeah, this is how you can do it. And then this is for the default format. And then for the chart itself, it's very simple. Let me just do it one more time together. I'll just delete this one. Then we can do line chart. And then for data, so what you're gonna select is you're gonna go to line chart. And then I'll just kind of zoom in for you. So for grid itself, I kind of got confused last time. It's like kind of how to select the data, right? So for grid itself, actually, you have to select just the data itself. Because if you come from like maybe Excel or Google Sheet, right, you can actually just select everything and kind of knows like, especially I think for pivot table, you just kind of know. But for grid itself, you have for data, you have to actually just select the data itself. So when I select the data, you can see my chart. You kind of see there's like a semblance of the chart now. It's kind of working, but then not fully. So what is not working now is the month. So it's actually displaying 1 to 12, which is okay, but we kind of want it to display into January to December. And then we have the number here. We kind of want to know like, it's a US dollar or maybe a different currency rate. And then here is like we kind of don't know what this means. Like, what does it mean? Like, is the actual projected? Like, so this is kind of what we want to improve. So what you can do is on the properties here. So X label basically means the horizontal. So what we can select is instead of selecting from here, we don't have it. We don't want it from here. Right? So what we can do is you can go to main. So this is kind of why we have this month here. You can just select the month from January to December. So we don't need to have any filter trick here because it's always January to December. At least I have not experienced any different months before. So you can see, yeah, it's populating here. And next one is we want to have the legend, or maybe you can have the chart title first, maybe actual versus budget. We can see here, so actual versus budget. And then we have the legend here. So we just click here and then kind of select our legend. So where do we get our legend? So there's actually no particular way on how you can get it, but in our case, I'll just use what we have here. So some actual and then some projected. In this case, we go back here, you can see we have the legend now, so you can kind of make sense of what each of these means. And the last thing, just to make sure that we have the US dollar, so you can go to data option here. You can select the label number format, just the US dollar, and then axis here. I think it should be Y axis, US dollar. And then let's kind of see, make sure it's working. Yeah, we can see US dollar here, and then even here is US dollar as well. So yeah, that's how it kind of works. And then we have a line chart completed. And then the last one thing that tricks that is kind of unique to Notion as well is when you kind of share your charts. So you select more options here. Let me Just zoom in a bit more. So it's like get embed code. And then let me just, how do I go to the middle? It's kind of see. I don't really know how to zoom out actually. Let me just zoom out a bit first. More options, get embed code. Okay, kind of zoom in again. I don't think I can zoom in. So basically, what I have to take is select few contents to full embed. So what this means is that when you actually, maybe I just do a reference to you guys. So copy embed, right? If I just do it like this, and then I'll go down here, let me just paste it here. And then another thing is like, because grid is, because Notion itself, they have this grid embed as well, but never use this. So what happens is that when you use this, right, you will just copy the link here. Yeah, I don't think it works like this. It probably has to kind of like copy the link. I don't quite remember actually, but I kind of just want to show you guys why I don't recommend using it. So if I copy the link, right, what happens is that you can just see like there's this very ugly like border here, like at the bottom here, which I definitely do not want. And then you kind of see like it's very small, like compared to this chart I have, right? It's actually like full size. So this is another reason why we don't recommend it. But yeah, this is one. And then the second is, yeah, I hope this video finds helpful. So I know that it's a bit lengthy, but I just feel like it's a lot of things that I go through, like it's quite frustrating for me. But yeah, so we copy embed again just to show you. So instead of using that method, let's just use embed and then paste it in this one. So what we notice is that it kind of works, It's working here, you can see the chart, but then you can see that it doesn't actually kind of go even stretch longer. But as compared to here, like you can see like this actually stretch to the end, right? I actually just realized I'm using bar chart here and be using line. But yeah, I kind of get you guys get the idea. So yeah, how do we actually get from here this one, right? We don't want this one. So that's another trick that we need to use. Is let me just go back to grid and then I click share again. More option, get copy and embed code, and then make sure it's like fill contents to full embed with, and then select copy embed, and then the final steps is just slash embed and then paste it and then embed link. So once you have it, just wait to load and then just drag it on. And you can see the actual chart now, and then you can kind of make it smaller and bigger. It's kind of resized based on what you select. So yeah, there you have it. So this is kind of like a beginner guide for people who just getting started between using Grid and Notion. Just want to share a lot of, like some of the ways that I actually spend a lot of time trying to figure out. I actually spend a lot of time like using ChatGPT to just kind of help me figure out some of these formulas and then contact with the Grid teams as well. Yeah, I hope this is helpful. If you like it, I hope you can follow and subscribe. So I'm going to show you more things about Notions, grids, or just charts. Yeah, thank you and have a nice day.